Hi, my name's Lee, and you are listening to The Enlightened Buzz. I am so excited about today's episode because we are actually going to talk about the different ways you can consume THC and how they're not only all different, but they can impact you differently. What are the major ways to consume THC? Well, frankly, there's a lot. And I feel like every day I'm coming across some new brand or article that's advertising some new level of consumption. But for the sake of today's video, we're just going to focus on the main three, which is smoking, gummies, and drinks. I want to first make sure that you are familiar with the terms onset and offset. Basically are how they sound, and that means that is how quickly the THC enters your system and you feel the effects, as well as exit your system and essentially you go back to feeling normal. I've got one disclaimer before starting, and that is I am not coming at this from some chemical engineer doctorate level education. I have done the research. I have some experience myself. I intend on delivering this information in the most basic and simple way for me, to explain, and for you to understand. If you would like to further research this, I encourage you. There is a plethora of information available, but I am just simply coming from a very high perspective and really from my opinion as a consumer. So first up on our list is smoking. Okay, that was so cheesy. First up on the list is smoking. And I start there because it's frankly, I think the most well-known. Dare I use the word famous? I don't know. It got its reputation in the 60s and the 70s with the hippies and Woodstock and then Cheech and Chong. And now you've got Snoop Dogg and you've got these whole cultural messages that really surround smoking cannabis. So that's historically the way we know it to be consumed. A quick little fact is that of cannabis users, 50% still prefer the method of smoking over some of the newer technologies that have come out recently, such as gummies or drinks. So I can't explain why such a large percentage of the population prefers smoking versus other consumption methods. However, I can tell you that smoking is more known to have a quick onset and a quick offset. So therefore, you have a more controlled experience. And that's because as you are inhaling the cannabis, it's traveling through your lungs, and that's where it enters the bloodstream. So your onset time could be as quick as seconds to minutes of consumption. Equally, it doesn't stay in your system too terribly long. You can kind of go about your day after this usage. While I would classify the onset time as a pro in the smoking category, you can't ignore that the biggest con is the damage to your lungs. At the end of the day, inhaling anything that has been burned is inhaling a carcinogen. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just simply stating the smoke of any kind is bad for our lungs. So even if you hang out by campfires for a living, which would be super weird, that's also equally bad for your health. Briefly touched upon smoking, and I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about gummies and drinks, and that's because I think there's a lot more questions that surround those two categories because frankly, they're just newer to the cannabis game. There's a lot of curiosity and confusion around how they impact you and how it all works and all of that. So now we're going to talk about gummies. I happen to have one here, so there you go. I have it just kind of as an example for some of the things we're going to talk about. I jokingly was thinking how funny it would be if I just ate this whole thing. That would be a terrible idea. So, what's the story behind these little gummies? For starters, I can tell you they have a much longer onset and offset time. So, it can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours before these suckers kick in. And the crazy thing is it can differ by person. And so I have some friends where it kicks in for him in 30 and then it takes her 2 hours. So that's frustrating when they want to share the experience together and yet they're on two entirely different timetables. In addition to that, it can also depend on what you had to eat that day or even the day before as to how it impacts. Why does it take so long to feel the effects of a gummy? Well, that's because you put it in your mouth, you chew it up, now it travels down to your stomach, and it's in your stomach and it has to digest. Then it transfers over to your liver, and it's once it's in your liver that it actually enters into your bloodstream, which is the point that you start feeling the effects of THC. So it can take anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on who you are, how fast your body digests, or what else you've had to eat that day. And the crazy thing is, you don't always know. You just kind of have to sit around and wait. For some people, the idea of a long onset time might be ideal for their situation. From my opinion, it's a little scary because A, you don't know how long it's going to take or where you're going to be when it kicks in, because you might have had something pop up or a change of plans and suddenly you don't know how to be in control of the situation. But even scarier, I've heard this happen to so many people where they will have a gummy or part of a gummy and they ingest it and then time passes, more time passes, and they're convinced that they didn't eat enough. Or maybe they had a bad product and so then they go out and they eat more, only to wait a few minutes and find that original dose has kicked in. Now they're like, basically, buckle up, buttercup, you're just along for the ride. So seriously though, it's a little scary when you think about it. And frankly, that's why I guess I get a little bit more fearful to experiment with gummies, because I don't always know what I'm signing up for. And you don't find out until like 30 minutes to 2 hours later. I kind of always use the analogy of it being like a roller coaster that you just kind of get on. And at that point that it kicks in, you're buckled in and you're not going anywhere. So you're just along for the ride at that point. Onset time comes along offset time. So that means that once it kicks in, it can be in your system for several hours potentially. And it also delivers a more intense experience because of the way it's ingested and processed through your liver. You're actually getting a different THC experience than if you were to smoke it or drink it. And it's actually going to deliver more of that THC. And if you're like me, that could mean that you might have more tendencies towards paranoia. Not necessarily, but it's a possibility. This leads me to talk about dosing for gummies, and it can be confusing at times. And I say that only to encourage everybody to read the labels and the packaging very well, because sometimes the bottles or the bags will mark down the total milligrams for the entire package. And then sometimes some of the packages will write down what it is per gummy. So I've seen it every which way. You just have to make sure that you know exactly how much is in one single gummy. Point out that this one is 10 milligrams. And I mean, that's, I guess, an average dosage for some. For me, however, that's too much. And so now I'm in a situation where I have to take this tiny gummy and start cutting it with a knife and then hope that I kind of have a half or a fourth. And then it gets really weird because if I only want a quarter, now I'm having to chop this thing up pretty small. And I've seen gummies much smaller than this. So needless to say, it can get a little complicated. Another thing to note is that gummies are pretty readily available. So I live in Texas, and again, there's like a CBD store on every corner. And I know in some states, they sell these in gas stations and things like that. Fairly affordable, so kind of an easy access point if you're looking to try them. Again, I just caution you to go to a reputable store and talk to somebody behind the counter to discuss kind of some of the better known brands so that you don't accidentally buy something that you can't trust. I would like to point out one more thing about gummies, and it's both a pro and a con from the perspective of a parent. And that is that these little guys are wonderful. they're delicious and delightful, and they're made of pure sugar, and they often taste like watermelon or pear or strawberry, and they're tasty. However, from the perspective of a parent, it can be a little scary to have these around your house. Again, everything should be properly stored and safely put away, so children should never have access to this. However, the fact is, at the end of the day, they are fruit snacks and gummies. And we have done nothing but condition children over the years to identify fruit snacks and gummies as kids' food. We've never changed that narrative. And so the idea of a child accidentally stumbling across these products is really terrifying to think about. Again, I only point that out as a parent because it's one more reason why I might be less inclined to have these around my house. We're going to talk about drinks, and I'm sure you can tell I'm excited, and that's because it's just so new and exciting right now. It's a concept that hasn't been around for a long time. The technology has advanced so that this can even be a thing. And I feel like every day I'm seeing a new brand or a new flavor or a new style using different kinds of ingredients hit the market. And it's just really exciting to be part of it. So I have a few drinks here just to show you examples. A lot of them this is the same size can that you would see for like a White Claw. But then you also have smaller cans. And honestly, all of these are different in that some are Delta 8, some are Delta 9. If you have questions about the difference in those, I have another video on that you can watch. And they all choose different dosages. So it's really a matter of finding out what works best for you. So the onset time for THC drinks is actually pretty fast. It's not quite as fast as smoking, but it's not as long as ingesting a gummy. And that's because the drinks are using a process called nanoemulsification. Ultimately, that means that the molecules are so small and water soluble that they're getting absorbed into your bloodstream more quickly. So I take a drink, and immediately the liquid's in my mouth, and it's starting to get absorbed in my mouth, then continues down my esophagus and into my stomach, all the while absorbing and going into my bloodstream. It does eventually hit the liver, but at that point, most of the THC has been absorbed into my bloodstream, which means that it's having an effect as early as 10 to 15 minutes. So the fact that these drinks are indeed liquid and they have a faster onset time makes them more similar to if you were drinking a beer or a wine, in that you have a few drinks and then you wait, and in 10 or 15 minutes, you will see where you're at. And at that point, you can decide if you want to stop or drink more. However, one very big thing to note is that if I was drinking a glass of wine and I had 8 ounces, I know relatively where I'm going to be after that 8 ounces of wine. But if I'm drinking 8 ounces of a THC beverage that has 10 milligrams, then that is going to feel like I'm only drinking 1 glass of something. But the reality is, because of the high dosage, I'm going to get hit a lot harder at the end of that drink. So I only say that because it's something that you have to be aware of depending on your social experience and how you want to pace yourself throughout the night. So yeah, that's THC drinks and gummies and a little bit about smoking. I hope you found this information helpful and informative, and I will definitely stay in the know with other brands and products and technology that becomes available, and be sure to share that with you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I appreciate your support. Thanks for listening to The Enlightened Buzz.